My name is Emily, and at 34 years old, I finally reached one of the biggest dreams of my life. After years of saving, planning, and sacrificing, I was able to buy my very own house. For me, it was more than just buying property. It was about freedom, privacy, and having a space that was truly mine. But I didn't share this huge step with my family. I kept it a secret, and for good reason. You see, my family has always been the kind that hovers, interferes, and crosses every boundary. They love me, sure, but their version of love has always come with control. My mum, Linda, is the definition of a controlling parent. Long before anyone ever used the phrase helicopter mum, she was already living it. Since the time I was a child, she made sure nothing in my life was ever fully private. I remember being a little girl and realizing my bedroom door had no lock. Mum used to say, "We're family, and family doesn't keep secrets." That was her rule. Privacy didn't exist in our house. I'll never forget the day I was 13 years old and caught her reading my diary. It was a cheap pink diary with a little lock on it, something that felt special to me. It was the one place I thought I could safely put down my thoughts, my feelings, and my secrets. But when I walked in and saw her flipping through the pages, my heart broke. Tears streamed down my face as I confronted her. But she just looked at me calmly and said, "Emily, I need to know what's going on in your life. How else can I protect you?" That day changed me. I realized in my family, love and control were seen as the same thing. My mum didn't just read my diary. She opened my mail, listened to my phone calls, and even questioned my friends like she was some kind of detective. My dad, Robert, was a quieter man, not nearly as controlling, but he never challenged her. Either it felt like they were a team, and I was always the one who had no say. When my younger brother Daniel was born, I was 8 years old. That's when things shifted even more. Daniel quickly became the favorite child, the golden boy. Mum gave him the same suffocating attention, but unlike me, he seemed to thrive on it. Maybe it was because he was the baby of the family, or maybe because he was the only son. Either way, the rules were different for him. Whenever I tried to point out that I was treated unfairly, my parents always said, "Your brother needs more support." So I learned to need less, to want less, to expect less. By the time I was old enough to leave for college, I thought I'd finally get my freedom. I chose a school 4 hours away, just far enough that I had to live in the dorms. Those first few months felt like heaven. Nobody checking what time I came home. Nobody asking who I was with. I even ate ice cream for breakfast sometimes, just because I could. But that freedom didn't last long. Somehow, Mom had managed to befriend my resident advisor Laura, and she started getting updates about me. She even visited me at least twice a month, showing up with food and cleaning supplies, and then complaining about my roommate, saying she must be a bad influence because she kept her side of the room messy after graduation. I landed a great job as a financial analyst. I had a chance to move to Chicago for an amazing opportunity, but Mom worked her magic crying, guilt-tripping, and insisting that family should always stay close. She told me, "Someday you'll have kids and you'll need help. You'll thank me for staying near us." And so I gave in again. I stayed in my hometown, renting an apartment just 15 minutes away from my parents. That way, Sunday dinners were unavoidable, and random drop-ins were easy for them. When Daniel got married to Megan about 5 years ago, I watched my sister-in-law slip right into our family dynamic. Megan didn't seem to mind Mum's constant involvement. In fact, she seemed to like it. They shopped together, called each other every day, and even discussed Megan's marriage and personal life openly with Mum. When Daniel and Megan bought a house just a few blocks from my parents, Mum was over the moon. She kept hinting that I should do the same. "Emily, wouldn't it be wonderful if we all lived in the same neighborhood? Then we'd always be together," She even sent me real estate listings near their street almost every week. But deep inside, I had a different plan. I had been saving money for years, living below my means, and investing carefully. I knew one day I wanted a house of my own, far from my family's constant reach. The first time I even mentioned moving across town, about 30 minutes away. The entire family staged what felt like an intervention. Everyone from my father to my aunt Donna piled on reasons why I shouldn't move. It's too far. What if you get sick? What if something happens and we can't get to you? Mum cried. If you move away, who will bring you soup when you're sick? Who will check on you when you don't answer the phone? I caved, renewing my apartment lease. But that moment taught me something important. My independence would never be given to me. I'd have to take it. So I doubled down on my savings, determined to break free. And when I was finally ready to buy, I kept it a complete secret. I told my family I was taking an evening financial planning course on Tuesdays and Thursdays. In reality, I was out meeting with realtors, attending open houses, and talking to mortgage brokers. Even during lunch breaks at work, I was sneaking away to make calls about home inspections. It wasn't easy. Every decision rested on me alone, and at times the stress nearly broke me. I'd lie awake at night wondering if I was making a huge mistake. But then I'd remember how Mom had interfered when Daniel and Megan bought their house. She'd been at every showing, criticizing the kitchen cabinets, the ceilings, even the windows. She even tried negotiating directly with the seller, ignoring the realtor. I still remember how Megan's face fell when Mum convinced her the house wasn't good enough. That image alone was enough to keep me strong. After months of searching, I finally found the one. A beautiful 1920s colonial home in a quiet neighborhood called Oakwood. The moment I walked inside, I felt peace, something I hadn't felt in years growing up. Original hardwood floors, a bay window perfect for reading, and a little garden out back. It was simple, but it felt like mine. My realtor, Carla, smiled knowingly when she saw my reaction. "You love this one," she said, not even asking, but stating it like a fact. She was right. The closing process was intense. I lied at work, telling Mr. Johnson I had a doctor's appointment so I could sign papers. I even rented a P.O. box so no mail would accidentally go to my apartment and be seen by my family. I paid extra for a mobile notary to meet me at a coffee shop instead of going to the title company, just to keep things hidden. When I finally held the keys in my hand, I could hardly believe it. Carla hugged me and handed me a small plant, saying, "Every new home needs something alive in it." Standing in my empty living room, I realized for the first time I had something that was completely mine. But moving in had to be slow and careful. I kept my apartment as a cover, transferring things little by little so no one would notice. I skipped Sunday dinners by making excuses about work so I could paint, clean, and slowly build the home I'd always dreamed of, at my house. I painted the walls sage green, a color I loved but knew Mum would hate. I arranged my books by color instead of alphabetically, hung art that didn't match the furniture but made me happy, and filled the space with little things that spoke only to me. For once, I was free to make choices without worrying about someone else's approval. I told myself I'd eventually let my family know. My plan was to invite them for dinner after everything was set up, proudly showing them my accomplishment. I thought maybe, just maybe, Mum would be proud of me. Maybe Dad would be impressed by my independence. But deep down, I knew my family never reacted the way I imagined. And sure enough, when the truth came out, it was nothing like I had pictured. The day everything changed for me started off just like any other. It was late April, and spring was finally pushing away the cold. I'd been living in my new house for about 6 weeks at that point, still leading my double life. My family thought I was just busy with work and evening classes, but really, I was using that time to make the house into my own little sanctuary. That morning, I had a big client meeting scheduled for the afternoon. I had worked for days on it, practicing my presentation, checking every number, and making sure everything was perfect. But at around 11:30, my boss, Mr. Johnson, sent me a text. Meeting cancelled. Rescheduled for next Tuesday. You've been working hard, take the rest of the afternoon off. At first, I didn't know what to do with the unexpected free time. Normally, I would have used it to relax at my apartment, maybe take a nap or catch up on errands. But my heart pulled me in another direction. I thought about my house. I had a list of little projects waiting. A mirror I'd found at an antique shop needed to be hung, the kitchen cabinets needed to be reorganized, and the living room still had a couple of boxes stacked in the corner. Excited, I packed up my things at the office, told my assistant Tina I was heading out, and drove straight to Oakwood. The sun was shining, my windows were rolled down, and for once I felt calm, peaceful, and completely in control of my life. But the moment I turned onto my street, that peace shattered. I slowed my car as I spotted 3 vehicles in my driveway. A silver Lexus, my mum Linda's car, a blue Honda Megan's, and next to them, a red compact car I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. For a second, I told myself maybe they were visiting a neighbor. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew. Those cars were in my driveway. I drove past slowly, my heart hammering, trying to process what I was seeing. As I circled the block, I caught movement through the front window. Someone was inside. I parked around the corner, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped my keys twice before locking the car. My chest felt tight as I crept along the side of my property, crouching behind a row of bushes. That's when I heard voices drifting out through the open dining room window. The crown molding is original to the house. My mother's voice rang out, cheerful and proud, like she was some kind of tour guide. Emily has no idea how lucky she was to find a place with these details still intact. I froze, every nerve in my body buzzing. She was inside my home. She hadn't just found out, I realized with horror she had a key. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see her standing in my dining room, waving her arms as if she owned the place. Beside her, Megan nodded like she was impressed. And there was another woman, I didn't recognize her, tall blonde, with a designer handbag. That had to be the owner of the red compact outside. Has she decided on a color scheme yet? The blonde asked. This room would look stunning with navy walls. Oh, Chloe, you know how indecisive Emily can be, my mum said with a laugh. That's why I wanted to show you the place. She needs guidance, and you have such a great eye for design. Hearing those words made me want to scream. My mum hadn't just broken into my home. She had brought my sister-in-law and some stranger along, as if my house was a group project for them to manage. I moved quietly toward the kitchen window, straining to hear. The kitchen's nice, but it's dated, Megan's voice floated. Through, those cabinets have to go, and the countertops. I can't believe she settled for laminate. Don't worry, Mum assured her. Robert and I were thinking of giving her some money for her birthday to redo this space. It just isn't functional for entertaining. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Entertaining? I didn't buy this house to host family cookouts. I bought it to finally have peace. The kitchen worked perfectly for me. I loved the vintage style, but to them it was just another family project waiting to be redesigned. I followed their footsteps. With my ears as they moved upstairs, my heart pounded as I slipped to the back of the house, hiding behind the oak tree near the bathroom window. The main bedroom gets beautiful light in the morning, Mum was saying, but I think heavy burgundy drapes would make it more sophisticated. Chloe, don't you agree? How much did she pay for this place? Chloe asked casually, as though my private finances were her business. Just under 300,000. Mum answered without hesitation. She had a good down payment, but honestly, I think she overpaid. This neighborhood isn't as desirable as the realtor made her believe. I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting back a gasp. Not only had Mum discovered the purchase price, but she was openly sharing it with a stranger. My own financial information, something I had guarded so carefully, was being passed around like gossip at a coffee shop. Well, the backyard's perfect for barbecues, Megan added brightly. I can already see Daniel setting up the grill. And there's so much room for kids to play once we start a family. Yes, exactly, Mom agreed. This house will be perfect for family gatherings. That was the breaking point. My knees nearly buckled from the anger boiling inside me. My achievement, my home, wasn't mine to them. It was just another family asset, another space for them to take over. I stayed hidden for almost an hour, listening as they toured every inch of my house. They criticized my furniture choices, planned out renovations I didn't want or need, and even talked about hosting summer events in my backyard. It was like watching vultures pick apart something I had worked so hard to protect. Finally, I heard the front door open. The three of them stepped outside, chatting casually, as if nothing they had done was wrong. And then my stomach twisted. Even tighter, my mum pulled out a key and locked the door behind her. A key I had never given her. I waited until they all drove away before running to my front door. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell of my mum's perfume hit me, floral and strong. The same scent she'd worn my entire life. It felt like an unwanted ghost clinging to my walls. I scanned the rooms, noticing the little changes they had made. A pillow out of place, a candle moved, a book shifted. Every small sign of their presence made me feel violated all over again. My first call was to a locksmith. I didn't care about the cost. Within the hour, a young guy named Diego arrived, and I paid extra for him to replace every lock in the house immediately. As he worked, he asked politely, having trouble with break-ins in the neighborhood. I forced a tight smile. Something like that, I muttered. Not about to explain that my intruders were my own family. By the time the new locks were installed, my phone was ringing non-stop. It was Mum, calling again and again. I ignored the first two calls, but when the third one came, I answered. Her voice was sharp with anger. Emily, I just tried to stop by your house again to drop off some paint samples, and my key didn't work. Did you change the locks? Her words nearly knocked me over. She wasn't even hiding it. She had planned to come back a second time. The very same day. Yes, I changed the locks, I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you want to explain why you had a key to my house in the first place? Or why you thought it was okay to give a tour to Megan and a stranger I've never even met? There was a pause. Then her voice softened into that familiar, manipulative tone. I don't know why you're upset. I was just proud of you and wanted to show Megan and Chloe your beautiful home. Chloe is an interior designer. She had wonderful ideas for your space. That's not the point, Mum, I snapped. You didn't have permission to be in my house. You didn't have permission to make a copy of my key. And you sure as hell didn't have permission to share my private information with people I don't know. Chloe isn't a stranger, she scoffed. She's Denise's daughter. You remember Denise from church. And besides, we're family. Family doesn't need permission. I closed my eyes, pinching my forehead as the anger built. That's exactly the problem, Mum. You've never respected my boundaries. Not when you read my diary as a kid, not when you opened my mail as an adult, and definitely not now. Silence filled the line, and then it hit me. That's how she had found out. The closing documents for my house had been mailed to my apartment. She must have taken my mail and opened it. You went through my mail, didn't you? I asked quietly. Her silence confirmed it. I finally said the words I should have said years ago. You were wrong, Mum. Completely wrong. This is my house, and from now on, you'll only come inside when I invite you. After hanging up the phone with my mum, stood there on my back patio, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest was heaving, my head pounding, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. My own mother had admitted, without shame, that she had entered my house with a key I never gave her. And to make it worse, she didn't even see the problem. Minutes later, I heard a loud knock at my front door. When I looked through the peephole, there was my brother Daniel, his face red with anger. I didn't even bother unlocking the chain. I cracked the door just enough to look at him. "What the hell, Emily?" he snapped, not even saying hello. "Mom's at home crying because of you." I crossed my arms. "Hello to you too, Daniel. I assume she called you right after we talked." Of course she did. His voice was filled with frustration. "She's devastated. How could you accuse her of violating your privacy when all she was doing was trying to help you?" I stared at him, searching his face for even a flicker of understanding. But all I saw was blind loyalty to Mum. "Did she tell you that she made a copy of my key without my permission? That she brought Megan and a complete stranger into my home while I was at work?" For just a second, I saw doubt cross his eyes, but then he shook his head, brushing it away. "She was just excited for you. She wanted to help make your house feel like a home." I shook my head slowly. "Daniel, it is my home. Mine, not hers, to redecorate. Not Megan's to plant barbecues in. Not a family clubhouse. It's mine." "You've always been like this," he shot back, his voice rising. "So selfish. So obsessed with your so-called space. Family is supposed to be involved in each other's lives. That's what love is." I felt my anger boiling, but my voice came out calm. "No, Daniel, that's not love. That's control. Love would have been respecting my choice to buy a house on my own. Love would have been waiting for me to invite you inside when I was ready. Love would have been trusting me to manage my own life." His face hardened. "So that's it. You're just cutting us all off because Mum wanted to help." "I'm setting boundaries," I corrected. "Something I should have done years ago." He let out a bitter laugh. "Boundaries. That's just a fancy word for shutting out the people who care about you. Fine, Emily. Have your precious space. But don't come crawling back when you realize how lonely it is on that high horse of yours." With that, he turned and stormed back to his car. I closed the door, leaning against it as my body shook. For years, I had tried to avoid conflict. In my family, I swallowed my feelings, kept quiet, and let them walk all over my boundaries. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't backing down. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Within hours, my phone blew up with text messages. My Aunt Donna wrote, "Emily, I'm so disappointed in the way you treated your mother. She loves you more than anything. Don't throw that away." My cousin Chris chimed in, "You really need therapy. All this paranoia about family being in your house. It's not normal." Even my dad, Robert, usually the peacekeeper, sent a short, cold message. "Apologize to your mother. You've blown this way out of proportion." The family narrative was clear. I was the dramatic one. I was the selfish one. I was the ungrateful daughter rejecting her mother's love. No one, not a single person, was willing to admit that making a copy of my key, walking into my house uninvited, and sharing my private financial details with strangers might actually be the problem. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The walls I had painted sage green glowed softly in the lamplight. My mug of tea had gone cold in my hands. I felt exposed, raw, and yet strangely free. For the first time, I had stood my ground. I hadn't caved. I hadn't softened my words or let them guilt me into backing down. The cost was heavy. My family was furious with me. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages that tore me apart inside. But when I looked around at my home, I knew I had made the right choice. The locks were changed. The physical boundary was secure. Now I had to figure out how to protect the emotional boundaries too. The days after the confrontation fell into a new, uncomfortable rhythm. Mum, who had always called me daily, went completely silent. My brother's texts grew colder until they stopped altogether. Family group messages about Sunday dinners and birthdays didn't include me anymore. It was like I had been cast out, exiled, until I apologized and returned to their control. A week later, I came home to find a huge basket sitting on my porch. It was beautifully wrapped, filled with things like burgundy curtains, kitchen towels in colors I hated, and framed family photos I had deliberately chosen not to display. The card on top read, "Thought these items might help warm up your house. Family always forgives. Sunday dinner at 5:30. Love, Mum." The message was clear. I was being offered forgiveness if I agreed to play along, to decorate my home the way Mum wanted, and to rejoin the family fold. That night, I drove to my parents' house, placed the basket on their porch, and left a note. "Thank you for thinking of me, but I've already chosen decor that suits my taste. I won't be at Sunday dinner. I'm still processing the violation of my privacy. I hope someday you can understand why your actions were hurtful." 2 days later, my colleague Rachel mentioned something to me at work that made my blood run cold. "I ran into your mum at the grocery store," she said carefully. "She seemed worried about you. She told me you've been acting strange and pulling away from family. She even asked if you'd been behaving oddly here at the office." My stomach dropped. It wasn't enough for Mum to paint me as unstable to the family. Now she was spreading that story to my co-workers. This was a tactic I knew well. She had done the same thing when I went to college, making sure everyone thought I was unstable or troubled whenever I tried to establish independence. As spring turned to summer, the pressure only got worse. My Aunt Donna called, saying Mum had been having health problems, strongly hinting that my coldness was making her sick. My cousin Sarah reached out, suggesting family therapy, but with the clear assumption that I was the problem that needed fixing. Meanwhile, I started taking steps to protect myself. I hired a security company to install cameras at the front and back doors. I added motion sensor lights and a video doorbell. It felt extreme, like something out of a thriller movie. But knowing my family could no longer waltz into my home gave me peace of mind I desperately needed. When Thanksgiving rolled around, the pressure hit a peak. In my family, holidays were sacred. Attendance was mandatory, no excuses. My dad finally broke his silence and called me directly. "Your mother has set a place for you," he said, his voice stern. "Dinner's at 3. Megan's making her sweet potato casserole." I almost laughed at the assumption. After everything, he thought I'd just show up and pretend nothing happened. "I won't be there, Dad," I said quietly. "I've made other plans." In reality, those plans were just a quiet dinner with my friend Carla, but I didn't owe him an explanation. "This has gone on long enough, Emily," he said firmly. "You've made your point. Your mother feels terrible about the misunderstanding." I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Misunderstanding? Dad, she made a copy of my key and went into my home without permission. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a violation." "She's your mother," he shot back, as if that title excused everything. "Yes, she is, and I love her. But I can't keep pretending this behavior is normal. I can't live like this anymore. When you and Mum are ready to talk about what happened without dismissing my feelings, I'll be here. But until then, I need space." The line went quiet. I could almost hear decades of family dynamics pressing down on him. Finally, he sighed. "I don't even recognize you anymore. The daughter we raised would never turn her back on family." The words stung deeply. But beneath the pain, I realized something important. Maybe he really didn't recognize me anymore, because for the first time, I was standing up for myself. Christmas came faster than I expected, and with it, a whole new round of family pressure. My parents had always treated the holidays like sacred ground. No matter what was going on, sickness, arguments, work, everyone was expected to show up. This year was different. I wasn't at Thanksgiving, and now I wasn't planning on being at Christmas either. A few days before Christmas Eve, I came home to find a pile of brightly wrapped gifts stacked neatly on my porch. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor had left something, but when I bent down to read the cards attached, my heart sank. They were all from my mother. The first card read, "Christmas without you isn't Christmas at all. Please don't punish the family because of one mistake. Love, Mum. One mistake." That's how she described everything: stealing my mail, copying my house key, entering without permission, showing my private home to strangers. To her, it wasn't a huge violation of trust. It was just one little mistake. The gifts inside. The boxes made my stomach twist. A set of curtains in burgundy, the exact ones she had mentioned during her tour. Kitchen gadgets I hadn't asked for. A stack of family photos in matching frames, clearly meant to fill the walls of my new home. It wasn't generosity. It was another way of saying, decorate your house the way I want, and all will be forgiven. I carried the packages inside, but I couldn't bring myself to open them. I stacked them in the spare bedroom, where they sat like heavy weights, reminding me of everything I was fighting against. That week, I felt pulled in two directions. On one hand, I missed the warmth of the holidays, the sense of belonging, the smell of pine and cinnamon that always filled my parents' home in December. But on the other hand, I knew walking back into that house without boundaries would undo everything I had fought for. By New Year's, I knew I needed more support. The emotional weight was getting to me. That's when a colleague, Rachel, gently suggested I see a therapist she knew who specialized in family dynamics. At first, I hesitated. Therapy had always been dismissed in my family as something for weak people. But something inside me knew I couldn't keep carrying this alone. So, I made the call and booked an appointment with Dr. Miller. Walking into her office the first time felt like stepping into a different world. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue. Plants sat in every corner, thriving and full of life. The chairs were comfortable, not stiff or intimidating. And Dr. Miller herself had a warm, grounded presence that immediately made me feel safe. During our first session, I spilled everything: the years of boundary crossing, the key incident, the family's reaction, and the guilt that ate at me every time I said no. Dr. Miller listened quietly, nodding, and then she said something that stuck with me. What you're experiencing is a predictable response. When someone sets boundaries for the first time in a family that's never respected them, the guilt trips, the flying monkeys, other relatives pressuring you, the health scares, the minimizing, these are all tactics to pull you back into the old dynamic. Her words hit me like a truth I had always known but never heard out loud. For once, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't being selfish. I was simply dealing with a family that had never been forced to respect boundaries before. At one point, I asked her, was changing the locks really necessary? I feel like maybe I overreacted. She leaned forward, her eyes kind but steady. If a friend told you someone had made a copy of their house key without permission and entered their home while they were away, what would you tell them to do? I thought about it. The answer was obvious. I'd tell them to change the locks. Exactly, she said firmly. The fact that the person who did it is your mother doesn't make it any less serious. In fact, it makes it worse, because it's a betrayal of the trust that should exist between a parent and child. That one conversation lifted a weight off me. For years, I had been made to feel like my sensitivity was the problem, like my need for privacy was abnormal. But now, for the first time, I understood my reactions were healthy. The unhealthy part was how my family had ignored my boundaries my whole life. Over the next few weeks, I began seeing Dr. Miller regularly. Each session gave me more strength, more clarity. I started to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. The way my mom used guilt like a weapon. The way my dad avoided conflict by siding. with her quietly the way Daniel dismissed me as selfish whenever I wanted something different. Outside of therapy, I began building a new kind of support system. My realtor Carla, who had become more of a friend than a business contact, often called to check in on me. My coworker Jake invited me to join his friends for weekly game nights, giving me a sense of community without the drama. And my neighbor Helen, a retired teacher with a sharp sense of humor, became a sort of mentor, teaching me how to care for my garden and reminding me in her own blunt way that family doesn't get to run your life. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who respected me without demanding anything in return. It was a strange and wonderful feeling. Still, the grief lingered. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep, mourning the family I had always wished for, the mum who could have been proud of me instead of controlling, the dad who could have defended me, the brother who could have stood by me instead of turning against me. I wasn't just setting boundaries. I was letting go of the dream that my family might one day magically become what I needed them to be. But even through the tears, I held on to one truth. This house was mine. My choices were mine. My life, for once, was mine, and it was worth protecting. By the time spring rolled around again, it had been nearly a year since I bought my house in secret. A year since I had changed the locks. A year of fighting, grieving, and slowly building a new life. And then, one afternoon in October, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw Daniel standing there, hands shoved deep in his jacket. Pockets, no Megan, no mum, no dad, just him. He looked nervous. "Can we talk?" he asked. For a moment, I hesitated, scanning his face for signs this was another family setup. But all I saw was genuine unease. So I stepped aside and let him in. He sat on the edge of my sofa, looking around the room slowly. "Your place looks nice," he said finally. "Different than I expected, but nice." I offered him a glass of water, and after a long silence, he finally spoke. "I owe you an apology. I should have understood what you were saying about boundaries. I get it now, and I'm sorry it took me so long." I blinked in surprise. I had waited months for someone in my family to say those words, and I never expected it to be Daniel. "What changed?" I asked carefully. He let out a heavy sigh. "Megan and I have been having some problems. Not huge, but enough. Last month, she noticed that some of her personal things had been moved in our bedroom. Her journal, some work papers. At first, we thought maybe one of us misplaced them, or the cleaning service moved them. But then she realized Mom was making comments, specific things she couldn't have known unless..." He trailed off, meeting my eyes. "Unless she was reading Megan's journal, just like she used to read yours." A chill ran down my spine. I felt both sick and vindicated at the same time. When Megan confronted her, Daniel continued. "Mum gave the same excuses she always does. That she was worried. That she needed to know what was happening in her daughter-in-law's life to better support her. That family doesn't keep secrets." I nodded, the words painfully familiar. Megan was furious, Daniel admitted. She told me if I didn't change the locks, she was moving out for a while. And that's when it hit me. If I was ready to protect her privacy, why did I attack you for protecting yours? I sat there quietly, letting his words sink in. "Because," I said softly, "you were raised to see Mum's behavior as love, and I was raised to be the one who was overreacting when I pushed back." He nodded slowly. "You're right, and I'm sorry, Emily. I should have been a better brother." For the first time in years, we really talked. We shared stories of growing up in the same house, but experiencing it in completely different ways. He admitted what it was like being the golden child, always under pressure to be perfect. I explained what it was like being the one who learned to disappear, to need less, to make room for everyone else. By the time he left that evening, something had shifted between us. Our relationship wasn't magically fixed, but for the first time, it was based on honesty and respect, instead of family roles. And that felt like a beginning. 2 weeks after Daniel showed up at my house, something happened that I never thought would be possible. My parents agreed to meet me on my terms. For months, every attempt at a conversation had ended in arguments, guilt trips, or silence. But this time was different. Maybe Daniel had talked to them. Maybe they were finally realizing I wasn't going to fold. Whatever the reason, they agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, and they even accepted my condition. We would have a mediator present. The woman's name was Nora. She was calm, professional, and had the kind of steady presence that made you feel like maybe things could actually be worked out. My parents didn't look thrilled to have her there, but they agreed. That in itself was a small victory. When we sat down at the table, my mum clutched her latte so tightly it looked like she was afraid it would slip away. My dad sat stiffly beside her, glancing between me and Nora like he wasn't sure what to expect. Nora started things off. "Emily has shared some concerns with me," she said gently. "Today is a chance for all of you to listen to each other and hopefully find a path forward. Emily, would you like to start?" I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking under the table, but I forced myself to meet their eyes. "I love you both," I began, "and I miss having a healthy relationship with you. But for us to move forward, I need acknowledgement that what happened entering my home without permission was wrong, and I need clear boundaries going forward. No unscheduled visits, no sharing my personal information with other people, no decisions made about my home or my life without me." For a moment, the silence was so heavy I thought they might get up and leave. My mom's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes glistening but not soft. My dad shifted in his seat. Finally, my mom started to speak. "I never meant to hurt you, Emily. Everything I've ever done has been out of love and concern for your well-being." Her voice cracked like it always did when she wanted sympathy. I braced myself for another excuse, another round of justification. But then, something unexpected happened. My dad reached over and put his hand gently on hers. "Linda," he said, his voice firmer than I had ever heard when speaking to her. "I think what Emily needs right now isn't an explanation of your intentions. She needs acknowledgement of the impact of your actions." My mum looked at him, clearly surprised. For a second, I thought she might argue, but then she sighed deeply, shoulders slumping. She turned to me. "You're right," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have entered your home without permission. I shouldn't have made a copy of your key. I was wrong." The words didn't even register at first. I had waited months, maybe years, to hear something like that from her, and now they were here. Simple, direct, without excuses. My eyes stung with tears I hadn't expected. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means a lot to me." The rest of the meeting wasn't easy. Old habits kept creeping back in. My mum tried once or twice to justify herself, and my dad tried smoothing things over when the conversation got tense. But with Nora's guidance, we stayed on track. By the end of 2 hours, we had a basic framework for how to move forward. My mum agreed she would always text before visiting and wait for a response before coming over. My dad promised to respect my decisions about my house and my life, even if he disagreed with them. And I promised to stay in contact with regular phone calls and the occasional family meals, long as those boundaries were respected. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When we got up to leave, my dad did something he hadn't done since I was a kid. He hugged me. Not the quick, awkward pats I had grown used to, but a real hug. As he held me, he whispered, "I'm proud of you, for standing up for yourself, for this beautiful home you've made, for the woman you've become." The words hit me harder than I expected. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. For so long, I had longed to hear something like that from him, and now I finally had. The process of rebuilding wasn't instant. Over the next couple of months, there were slip-ups. My mom attended 3 therapy sessions with me and Dr. Miller, before declaring it unnecessary. But even in those few sessions, something shifted. We learned how to talk about boundaries in a way that didn't immediately explode into conflict. My dad even surprised me by continuing to meet with me and Dr. Miller on his own. For the first time, it seemed like he wanted to understand the patterns that had shaped our family. 2 months later, I invited my parents over for dinner at my house. I set clear rules beforehand: arrive at 6, leave by 9, no discussions about renovations or decorations, unless I specifically asked for their input. To my relief, they respected every boundary. They admired the house as it was, not as they would have made it. Slowly, painfully, a new kind of normal began to take shape. My relationship with Daniel grew stronger too. After our long talk, he seemed to understand me in a way he never had. Before, we still didn't agree on everything, but for once, we weren't locked in roles of golden child and problem child. We were just siblings. Even Megan surprised me. 6 months after the lock-changing incident, she invited me to lunch. When we sat down, she looked me in the eye and said, "I owe you an apology. I should never have gone into your house without your permission. And I should have recognized how wrong it was when Linda suggested it." Her words were direct. No excuses, no softening. "In my family, everyone's in and out of each other's homes all the time," she explained. "But that doesn't mean I get to impose that on you. Your boundaries are valid, and I'm truly sorry I violated them." That lunch marked the beginning of something unexpected. For the first time, Megan and I had a relationship built on choice, not obligation. We even discovered shared interest books, hiking, that had nothing to do with family. A year after I changed the locks, I hosted my first family gathering at my home. It was a small birthday dinner for my dad, carefully planned, with a start and end time, clear invitations, and a promise that my boundaries would be respected. To my surprise, it went smoothly. We laughed, we ate, and for the first time in a long time, I actually enjoyed myself. As my mum prepared to leave that night, she paused in the entryway, looking around the living room. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I never would have chosen that color for your walls. But seeing it now, with everything else you've done, I have to admit it suits you perfectly." Coming from her, that tiny acknowledgement that my choices could be right, even if they were different from hers, felt monumental. "Thank you, Mum," I said softly. And I meant it. By the time spring returned, a full year had passed since I had changed the locks on my house. And when I sat in my little garden on warm evenings, I couldn't help but think about how far things had come. It wasn't a straight path, and it wasn't easy. There were still moments when old patterns tried to sneak back in. My mum sometimes forgot to call before dropping by, or she slipped into her old controlling tone, suggesting what I should be doing with my home or my life. But the difference now was that I didn't let those moments slide. I didn't swallow my feelings. I calmly reminded her of our agreement, and most of the time, she caught herself and backed off. It was strange, but setting firm boundaries had actually made our relationship better. For so long, I had been terrified that standing up for myself would destroy my family. Instead, it had done the opposite. It had finally forced us to create a healthier way of being together. My mum even surprised me one day by casually mentioning she was seeing a therapist of her own. She never gave details, and she certainly didn't admit it was because of our conflict, but I noticed subtle changes over time. She began asking instead of assuming. She started listening more, offering fewer fixes when I told her about something going on in my life. For the first time, she seemed to be realizing that independence wasn't rejection, it was just life. My dad changed too. Once I stopped expecting him to always side with my mum, he started finding his own voice. Our relationship, which had always been filtered through her, slowly became more direct. We even discovered new common ground, like our shared interests in history and architecture. Conversations that used to feel shallow now became deeper, more personal. And then there was Daniel. For so long, he had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one Mum hovered over with pride instead of criticism. But after what happened with Megan's journal, something in him shifted. He finally understood what it felt like to have his privacy invaded, his boundaries ignored, and that changed the way he saw me. It didn't mean we suddenly became best friends. We still argued, we still saw things differently. But now there was respect. Real respect. For the first time, he treated me like an equal. We weren't playing old family roles anymore. We were just brother and sister, flawed but trying. Even Megan and I found a new footing. After her apology, we built a friendship that had nothing to do with family obligations. We'd meet for coffee or go hiking, and we'd talk about books, work, or life in general. We weren't pretending to be close just because we were related through marriage. We were choosing to build something real. My house, which had once been the center of so much conflict, had finally become what I always wanted, a sanctuary. It wasn't a hiding place anymore. It wasn't about keeping people out. It was about welcoming the right people in on my terms. I kept the security cameras, the video doorbell, and the new locks. To some people, that might seem paranoid, but to me, it was simply smart. I gave a spare key only to Carla, my friend and realtor, with the clear understanding that it was for emergencies only. That alone gave me more peace than I could explain. The lessons I had learned about boundaries started spilling into every other part of my life. At work, I stopped saying yes to projects that drained me just to please others. In friendships, I spoke up about my needs instead of always going along with what everyone else wanted. And in dating, I stopped confusing control for care or persistence for passion. Dr. Miller had been right. The discomfort of setting boundaries was temporary, but the freedom they created was permanent. Of course, there were still difficult days. Family patterns that were built over decades don't vanish in a year. Sometimes my mum would slip back into her old habits. Sometimes I'd slip into mine, retreating into silence instead of speaking up. But the difference now was that these moments weren't ignored. They were addressed, talked about, and worked through. One evening, I sat in my garden as the sun went down, thinking about how different things were from a year before. Back then, I had been terrified of losing my family, terrified that choosing myself meant being completely alone. But standing firm had brought me something better, relationships that were real, honest, and built on respect instead of control. I thought back to the day I changed my locks, when I was shaking with rage and fear, and I wished I could tell that version of myself something important. Yes, this is going to hurt. Yes, there will be days when you cry yourself to sleep, but in the end, it will be worth it. You'll discover strength you didn't know you had. You'll find healthier connections than you ever thought possible. And you'll finally build a life that feels like your own. The keys in my pocket felt different now. A year ago, they had felt like a shield, a desperate attempt to protect myself. Now, they just felt like keys. Ordinary, familiar, not a symbol of rebellion or separation, just the tools that opened the door to a place that was mine. That thought brought a smile to my face as the evening breeze rustled the lavender and rosemary I had planted along the garden path. My sanctuary was real, my boundaries were real, and my life was finally, truly mine. 6 months after the day I changed my locks, life looked completely different. Not perfect, not smooth, but different in a way I never would have believed possible. My mum was still my mum, strong-willed, opinionated, always believing she knew what was best, but there were cracks in her old patterns. She still had moments where she slipped back into control mode, but something was shifting. After a lot of pushing, and with Dr. Miller's suggestion echoing in my ear, she finally started seeing a therapist of her own. She never admitted what they talked about, but I could see the changes. She began pausing before giving advice. She asked questions instead of assuming she already knew everything. She even started listening, really, listening without immediately offering solutions. It wasn't perfect, but compared to the woman who once thought breaking into my house was an act of love, it was progress. My dad surprised me too. For most of my life, he had been the silent one, standing on the sidelines while my mum ran the show. But now that I had stopped expecting him to play referee, he began stepping into his own role. He would call me directly just to chat, something he never did before. We talked about history, books, and even architecture, things we both loved, but had never shared. It was like discovering a part of him I'd never known. My brother Daniel and I were also finding new ground. The golden child and the scapegoat roles that had shaped our relationship were slowly fading. He admitted to me one day that being the favorite hadn't been easy. It came with constant pressure to perform, to be perfect, to never disappoint. For the first time, I felt like he was being real with me, not just repeating the family script. Even Megan, my sister-in-law, had done something I hadn't expected. Months after the lock incident, she invited me to lunch, just the two of us. The moment we sat down, she said, "I owe you an apology." Her words were straightforward, no excuses. She admitted she should never have gone into my home without permission, and that she should have recognized how wrong it was when Linda suggested it. She told me that in her family, people came and went from each other's homes constantly, but that didn't give her the right to impose that same dynamic on me. "Your boundaries are valid," she said, "and I'm sorry I violated them." That moment changed everything. For the first time, I felt like she saw me, really saw me, as a person, not just an extension of the family. After that, we built a genuine connection. We weren't best friends, but we had a friendship that was real, not forced. My house, once the center of so much drama, had finally become my safe place. Not a fortress to keep people out, but a home where I could choose who to let in. I kept the cameras, the locks, and the video doorbell, not because I was scared anymore, but because they gave me peace of mind. I trusted myself now in a way I hadn't before. The changes didn't just affect my family, they rippled through every part of my life. At work, I stopped saying yes to projects just because I felt guilty. I chose the ones that matched my strengths and interests. With friends, I started speaking up about my needs instead of always putting theirs first. And in dating, I learned to recognize red flags early. I no longer mistook control for care or persistence for passion. But the most powerful change was inside me. The guilt that used to eat me alive whenever I stood up for myself was slowly fading. I was learning that protecting my peace wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Of course, there were still setbacks. One Sunday in early spring, my mum showed up unannounced, forgetting our agreement. She stood at the door, holding a casserole dish, smiling like nothing was wrong. I gently reminded her of our boundary. "Mum, I need you to call first. Today doesn't work." For a moment, I saw the old spark in her eyes, the one that said she was about to argue. But then, to my surprise, she nodded and said, "Okay, Emily, I'll call next time." That small moment felt huge. Another time, my dad tried to smooth things over when tension bubbled up during a family dinner. I stopped him, saying calmly, "Dad, I need you to let me handle this directly." He nodded, sitting back in his chair, respecting my request. It was awkward, but it was progress. Even Daniel stumbled. There were days he slipped back into calling me selfish when I didn't show up for every family event. But then, later, he'd circle back and admit he was wrong. "Old habits," he'd say, shaking his head. And for once, I believed. He meant it. The biggest change came the following April, 1 year after the lock incident. I decided to host a small family gathering for my dad's birthday. It wasn't a big party, just dinner with clear rules. Arrival at 6, leave by 9. No surprises. Everyone respected it. That evening turned out to be nice. Really nice. For the first time, I laughed with my family without feeling suffocated. We ate, we talked, and there was no undercurrent of control or resentment. As they were leaving, my mum paused in the doorway, glancing around my living room. She tilted her head, then said, "You know, I never would have chosen that green for your walls. But seeing it now, with everything else you've done, I have to admit it suits you." It was such a simple comment, but to me, it was monumental. It meant she was starting to see that my choices could be valid, even when they were different from hers. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet house, I realized something. A year earlier, I had been terrified of losing my family. I thought standing up for myself meant cutting them off forever. But now I understood. Setting boundaries hadn't destroyed my relationships. It had saved them. They weren't perfect. They never would be. But they were healthier. And for the first time in my life, I could breathe. A full year had passed since the night I changed the locks on my house. Back then, I was shaking with rage, fear, and guilt, convinced that one decision had ruined my relationship with my family forever. But now, as I sat on my back porch on a warm summer evening, I realized just how much had changed, not just in my family, but in me. The garden I had planted was thriving. The lavender and rosemary swayed in the breeze, filling the air with their scent. The little solar lights I had stuck along the pathway glowed softly as the sun went down. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was proof of what I could create. When I stopped letting other people control me, the house itself felt different too. When I first moved in, it felt like a secret, a place I had to protect from my family's reach. Every room carried tension, like a battle had been fought there. But now, it felt warm, safe, and alive. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the walls, every color I had chosen it, all reflected me, not anyone else's opinion. And the biggest change, my family no longer saw my house as theirs. It was mine. That shift had taken a year of hard conversations, tears, therapy, and sometimes silence. But it was real. My mom wasn't magically cured of her controlling tendencies, but she was learning. She was slower to criticize and quicker to listen. She had even admitted, in her own careful way, that therapy was helping her. That was something I never thought I'd hear. My dad had found his own voice. Instead of being the quiet bystander, he started calling me directly, checking in without waiting for Mum to push him. Our conversations felt genuine for the first time in my life. He had even told me, more than once, that he was proud of me not just for the house, but for the woman I had become. Daniel had finally stepped out of the golden child role. He understood now that being Mum's favorite wasn't freedom, it was pressure. And for the first time, he and I were able to talk honestly about what it was like growing up in the same house, but living such different roles. The honesty gave us a foundation we'd never had before. Even Megan, who once stood in my living room without my permission, was now someone I could grab coffee with and laugh over books or hikes. She had apologized sincerely, and we had built something real. Not a forced sisterhood, but a friendship we both chose. Looking back, I realized something powerful. Changing my locks hadn't just protected my home. It had forced me to confront the truth about my family. It pushed me to draw boundaries I should have set years ago. It taught me that love without respect isn't love at all, it's control. For so long, I thought choosing myself meant losing them. But what I lost wasn't real family. It was a version of family built on guilt, control, and silence. What I gained was something healthier, smaller maybe, but real. And the truth was, even if they hadn't come around, Evan, if my mom never admitted she was wrong, even if my dad never found his voice, even if Daniel never apologized, still would have been okay. Because for the first time, I knew I could stand on my own. That was the real gift of this house. not the walls or the garden or even the independence of owning property, was the lesson that I was allowed to take up space in my own life. I was allowed to protect myself. I was allowed to say no. One evening, I had Carla, my realtor-turned-friend, over for dinner. As we sat on the porch with glasses of wine, she looked around and smiled. "You know, Emily, I remember the day you bought this place. You were nervous, second-guessing yourself, wondering if you were making the right decision. But look at you now. This house isn't just yours, it's you." Her words stuck with me. She was right. This wasn't just a building. It was a reflection of everything I had fought for. A week later, Dr. Miller asked me in one of our sessions